Today's discussion gives a solid introduction to what it means to behave on purpose and how to go about facilitating it, with a lot of newish sort of lingo getting thrown around in the last decades, like grit, habit, willpower, mindset, an oxymoron if I've ever heard one, okay? Discipline, drive, okay? It tends to confuse how humans actually behave and, in effect, stunt a person's professional, educational, social, and personal development. In truth, we do some things better than others.
That is so true.
And other people do some things better than us, and we do some things better than them. And so Dr. Kashey opens the door ever so slightly as to why this happens and if it must work that way. Behavior. Oh, behave. Behavior. Key word here. I'll truncate the definition here. What does behavior mean? Because we tend to think about it or talk about it like things that you could see a person doing, okay? Like people think that saying and doing mean different things, but when you talk, you do something too. So let us clarify that a little bit. Behavior encompasses everything we do. Everything we do. Even if you do nothing, you do something, okay? So when you think, feel, act, interact, you behave. We regulate our behavior through past and present interactions with the environment and the people in it. And so regulating behavior means that we adjust what we do. So behavior regulation then means we adjust what we do about some standard, okay? Pretty straightforward. And humans, by and large, have two standards of behaving. One, stay alive. Standard number one of human behavior, stay alive, okay? And standard two, have a decent time. Those pretty much encompass the two standards of human behaving. Now, you can get fancy-pantsy and say that we have a physiological standard and a personal standard. Those end up going into the books. However, we want to stay alive and have a halfway decent time while doing it. And these standards, from personal, professional, anecdotal, empirical, clinical, academic evidence, suggest that these standards often conflict with each other. Staying alive and having a good time, often they kind of compound, or they conflict. So humans will human, okay? Some behaviors adapt us to the environment. So some of our behaviors adapt to the environment. Wow, I will adapt this handwriting to the environment. So some behaviors adapt us to the environment. Other behaviors, we adapt the environment to us. So if you walk into a dark room, what happens? Your pupils dilate. If you walk into a dark room, your pupils dilate. You can classify that as a behavior, okay? If it gets hot, you start sweating. Since behavior encompasses everything we do, that makes sweating a behavior, okay? Again, other behaviors adapt to the environment to us. Those included behaviors where we adapt to the environment, okay? If you walk into a dark room and you flip the switch on because you see better with the light, we've adapted the environment to us. If it gets too hot, you look for shade. You have a cold drink or turn on the fan because it cools you off, okay? You adapt the environment to you. So many human and, animal behaviors, they entail both adapting ourselves to the environment and adapting the environment to us. If you get hungry, you will eventually eat. That might mean cooking. If your heart races because somebody else drives too fast, you might tell them to slow down. If you like a person a lot, you'll do various things like call, text, invite them out, etc., to spend more time with them. So these sorts of interactions, they combine us adapting to the environment and adapting the environment to us. And that leads us to purposeful action or purpose-filled action. Whoops, there we go. You can do it. Excellent. Well, purposeful actions, they occur in the short term where somebody slows down and pulls off to the side when they see a fire truck with the sirens on, for instance. They happen in the long term where they complete a course or train for a marathon or lose excess body weight. So purposeful action means regulating your behavior as a whole around a beneficial outcome. So regulating behavior for a benefit, essentially. Regulating your behavior as a whole around a specific and beneficial outcome. So that might look something like changing food and activity patterns to lose weight and improve fitness. Purposeful action. To stick up for yourself when you feel pressured or bullied. Purposeful action. To start and grow a multi-million-dollar business. Purposeful action. Improving your relationship with somebody by validating their perspectives. All examples of purposeful action. So the more purposeful actions a person takes, the more purpose-filled their life becomes. You start accumulating the experiences that make life worth living. So when you have a lot of purpose-filled interactions, you start living your life on purpose and with purpose. Imagine that. So in many circles and growing, okay, purposeful action has started outranking intelligence. People put intelligence on a pedestal because of the potential utility rather than actual utility. Okay, so purposeful action has started outranking intelligence because of plenty of impressive looking people accomplish a whole lot of nothing. Oh, what good does IQ do for anyone one when they act demanding, chaotic, emotional, get dependent on drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, and the spotlight. What good does IQ do you then? Or anyone else that interacts with the person? That gets old fast when real world results make the real world difference. So purposeful action, as Alex Hormozy would say, only has upsides. It only has upsides. When you live life on purpose, you behave in ways that help you now and later. You can act rigid and flexible. Okay, you can act rigid and flexible in service of your goals and accomplish them faster because of it. So where does purposeful action come from? Where does it come from? We know a little bit about what it means, regulating our behavior about the standard, and that standard we define as the thing we want to accomplish, which falls under the umbrella of staying alive and having a halfway decent time. To keep the taxonomy straight here. Oh, up until a few decades ago, and still prevalent now in experts, gurus, etc., people thought that you inherited a lot of personality traits, okay? Like willpower. Some people are just born with more willpower. They are born with more grit. They born with more self-control, born with more drive, like these traits, or people have personality types that they just come into the world with stock, okay? As if you possessed these traits and you either have it or not, which meant you basically got stuck with what you had and you either won or lost the drive and self-control lottery, okay? Kind of lame. But it turns out they got it mostly wrong. So terms like grit, drive, self-control, discipline, willpower, etc., they get it all wrong because it makes it look like things that we have. Like we have willpower, we have grit, okay? But what do they really represent? They all represent the outcome of something you do rather than something you have. So they actually represent outcomes rather than causes. So somebody turning 21, for instance, they have self-control because they drank one shot and then stopped. An employee has drive because they finished the project early. An athlete has discipline because they train every day. A child has willpower because they saved one marshmallow now to have 2 marshmallows later. If you've ever had a bastardized experiment existing in the world of self-help literature. An inventor has grit because they wanted to quit on version 55, but got it at version 255. So did the employee inherit the finish before the due date gene? Did the inventor inherit the successful on version 255 gene? A lot of people would say yes, and they can suck on a toe. You see how silly this gets? The experts thought what we have really describes the outcome of something we do. A person is motivated because of their history of getting things done on time, rather than motivation causes them to get things done on time. So it gets the cause and effect totally backwards. So to summarize, to say a person has drive or grit or discipline or self-control or willpower and so on means this person tends to behave on purpose. They tend to behave on purpose. They tend to regulate their behavior around a standard, okay? An objective, typically a longer range objective. And so this has some interesting implications. So we do away with these pseudo-traits, because they just describe outcomes rather than causes. Ridiculous. Okay, we do away with these pseudo-traits in favor of something closer to reality. How about learning some damn skills?
Oh.
In this case, learning the skill of behaving on purpose, the skill of purposeful action. So we do have a genetic component to this, absolutely. Enough geneticists out there, spoken to a bunch of them, learned from a bunch of them, did a bunch of genetics work. You ever grown cancer? Kind of scary. Try it. In a dish though, please. Harder to do than you think. Any case, we do have a genetic component. Humans, as a species versus any given individual, they inherit the capacity to learn it, okay? So as far as the genetic part, humans come into the world with the ability to learn skills. Now we have a genetic component, a realistic one. So it kind of works like language. Do we come out of the womb belting out Shakespearean prose? We do, however, come out with muscles, facial structure, and the ability to form abstract relationships stock from the factory, okay? That happens just on accident, a fixed pattern of behavior, what some people might call instinct, okay? Then, over years of practice, we acquire and then master language as a skill. So, or more specifically, we start shaping the behavior with our face noise. We start shaping, literally and figuratively, to then master language as a skill. So we acquire the skill of purposeful action similar to how we acquire the skill of language in and of itself, which facilitates purposeful action, right? Regulating your behavior around a standard for a beneficial purpose. So we start learning it very young, okay? Less than 2 years old. Less than 2 years old, we start forming these abstract relationships. Pretty cool data for that sort of stuff. The basis of language ends up starting way earlier, okay? And it varies, okay? The skill of purposeful action varies because they have different histories, just like people speak differently because they have different histories. industries. It varies with people depending on the situation. People in different situations say different things. They also do different things for different reasons, okay? And we do better in some situations than others. We speak better in some situations than we speak in others. We behave on purpose in some situations better than others. And if we had these as heritable traits, well, then we would stay the same all the time. Each person has more purposeful behavior in some areas compared to others, okay? One person may up their networking efforts to excel at sales, okay? You start knocking on doors, handing out flyers, harassing people, closing like a monster, okay? And then get in an intimate situation and they just crumble. Another masters all the strategies of poker to take home the pot and then manages to burn water whenever they cook. Some people just decide to lose weight and it comes off and spend their money fast or faster than they get it when they both take accounting, which hilarious, okay? Just to give you an idea. So when we change ourselves, okay, we change our behavior, we regulate about a standard or change the standard, okay? When we change ourselves and see others change themselves, we see purposeful behavior in action, where we change what we do. In effect, we change the standard around what we do and then regulate our behavior around that standard. You can tell that you have it easy in some ways and you have it backbreaking difficulty in others, okay? What a shame we obsess over the stuff we find so difficult. So what skill differences do we see in areas that you excel in versus changing, okay? What skill differences do you see in areas you excel at changing, like you excel at changing your behavior, like losing weight or getting faster or learning math, whatever, an instrument, talking to people, versus the areas that you get stuck and struggle? You got things that you do well and you got things you suck at. What skill differences can we surmise from this? Let us do some surmising. Getting better at some things and sucking at others depends on tolerating frustrations in the moment and strategizing around frustrations that you know you'll encounter before you encounter them. This determines the main difference between knowing stuff that you change fast and stuff where you get stuck. Frustrations probably overwhelm you in the areas that you get stuck. And when you feel overwhelmed, that makes it tough to strategize around them for the future, etc., etc. So these two skills right here determine the difference between the things that you do well and the things that you suck at, more or less. And this brings up some important points because often you already know what to do insofar as you can describe the steps, okay? And the struggle comes from doing it in the situation it benefits you. We all know to eat less and move more. Well, how do you do that at a 40th floor penthouse in Vegas surrounded by a bunch of people shoving drinks in your face? Well, different takes tolerance and strategy. If you already know what to do, if you know the purposeful action, now it depends on tolerance and strategy to facilitate that purpose. Ooh, okay. It just so happens the situation you could use your knowledge the most causes the most frustration, stress, and misery. Where you find your roadblocks. We have very common roadblocks between each other where we know what to do and then we get into the situation, we just have a brain fart and act like a silly goose, okay? So if you have a speech memorized and then get in front of a crowd and have a brain fart, what good did all that memorizing do? Okay, if you have two people with equal skill in chess, two chess masters, all the same chess knowledge, and one has a tolerance to crowds and one has a social phobia, skill matter? No, because your effective skill goes down because his level of tolerance, how skillful he could tolerate the situation, affected his ability to perform. Okay, pretty cool. So the speech example, if you have the speech memorized and have a brain fart, what good does that do you? You'd probably get booed off stage and get told, maybe you should know your stuff, but you do know the stuff. You do know the stuff. Okay. If you meticulously planned out your food and cooked ahead of time, but then get pressured into going out and drinking, then what? If you want to get up early, but go to bed later, have fitful sleep and smack the snooze, then what? Both geniuses and simpletons have the same effing issues. Plenty of geniuses get hooked on drugs and act stupid, okay? Plenty of simpletons study very well and then crumble under pressure. So does intelligence really make the difference here? In most cases, intelligence turns moot. And in fact, the intelligence part of things just has this appeal to the genetic lottery as a fulcrum of avoiding things. Well, of course he does math well. He's a genius. Why should I bother trying? Which we'll get into soon enough, those demands. So the limits to your success depend on basic skills any human can learn. The verbally stunted autistic can learn tolerance and strategy, okay? And the super genius might have huge amounts of trouble learning tolerance and strategy. So this turns into the equalizer, okay? The limits to your success depend on two basic skills anyone can learn: your tolerance to stressful and frustrating situation and stimuli in the now, and your strategizing around stressful and frustrating stimuli in the future. The thing before the thing. If you can do genius level chess moves, well, can you do it upside down on the moon? Well, if not, you'll lose the upside down on the moon contest. Okay? Well, real world results make the real world difference, because obviously that exists in the real world. So let's get into tolerance a little bit. Tolerating something really means that a frustrating stimulus presents itself and you keep your cool. Okay? You act normal as possible given the frustrating conditions. Tolerance, normal AF. You act normal as F. Okay? Given the conditions, frustrating conditions, which we'll define frustration in a second. Okay? A frustration or a frustrating stimulus means conditions, factual, fictional, and philosophical, that get between you and what you want. People describe frustration as a feeling. We will throw that in the garbage in the weeks to come. It makes more sense to describe frustration as an observable event in the real world. Okay? So frustration means conditions, factual, fictional, or philosophical, that get between you and what you want. So let's have a couple of examples here. A cowboy might get knocked around by a bull, break a rib, and then laugh it off. Okay? What does this mean? He actively tolerates pain. Frustrating. Pain typically gets between you and what you want, making pain a frustration. A barista maintains a professional ethic and acts polite while the customer insults her, because although she got the order right, he wanted something else, and she should have known. She actively tolerates annoyance. Getting annoyed often acts as an obstacle between you and what you want. Smokers in the process of quitting say no to a person offering a smoke, even though it sounds relaxing and delicious. They actively tolerate cravings. See, tolerance happens actively. Do you just come into the world with tolerance? No, you do the tolerating. And since you do the tolerating, that means you can shape tolerating, which means that you can get better at tolerating, okay? That means it turns it into a skill. Let's move on to strategy now. Strategy means modification of the environment itself or rules of engagement within that environment ahead of time to dull, neutralize, or avoid the frustrating stimulus. So here we have act normal, and here we have make normal as possible. Okay, so tolerating, we act normal, and strategy, we make it normal. We make it normal. Okay, so this acts similar and separate from purposeful action. Okay, because when you in purposeful action, you do something in service of some overarching objective. Okay, so strategizing happens mostly to address and overcome some frustration in an acute setting, and so to manage things in that way so that your purposeful action gets you to the thing you want. So although they do have some overlap, strategy has more to do with specific frustrations in the moment, and purposeful action has more to do with the thing that gets you what you want with a more direct connection. So for instance, strategizing. By clearing out all the junky snack foods in the house, you avoid the frustrating stimulus of snack foods. So if you have a frustrating stimulus of snack foods, if you respond to it ahead of time, or you respond to it because of some other outcome, more specifically, okay? If you respond to that by taking the snack foods out of the house, well, then you avoid the frustrating stimulus entirely. By exercising early and getting in the sun early, you dull the stimuli that keep you up late, goofing off and eating, okay? Or you weaken. Dull we'll use dull more. By eating high protein, high volume foods with a lot of fiber, you neutralize the stimulus of hunger even when deep in a fat loss phase. And so if you have an idea of the stimulus and you have an idea how to respond in a way that strategizes around it, well, then that affects the outcome. That affects the outcome, and the outcome then either increases the probability or decreases the probability. You'll respond that way again, okay? So if you prefer a more epic example, epic examples preferred over here, in circa 800 BCE, Odysseus had his crew plug their ears with wax and time to the mast of his boat so he could sail through the Strait of Messina to hear the most alluring and dangerous song in Greek mythology, the Song of the Siren, and live to tell the tale. What do you find it easiest to get better at? What do you find it hardest to get better at? Frame it this way. Getting better at something, what does that really mean? It means that you change your own behavior. So really, you change your behavior more easily in some situations than others. And you have more problems changing, more struggles, more frustrations, or strategizing around those frustrations in some situations. So in what areas do you find it easiest to change, or what do you get better at the fastest? And in what areas do you find it hardest to change, or having it harder to get better at? Okay. Next, what differences do you see with the level of tolerance tolerance and strategy you have in both of those circumstances. So how good do you tolerate frustration? How well do you tolerate frustration when you do things you do well? How well do you strategize around frustrations when you do things you do well? That might end up turning circular because it makes it look like you got good at that thing because you could tolerate it and strategize. Ooh. Okay, interesting. Compare that with the stuff you find hardest to change. What do your tolerance skills look like for that? How quickly do you fatigue in the presence of frustrations when you do something you suck at? How difficult do you find it to strategize around those frustrations with something that you suck at? Okay, interesting. Give yourself some give your own examples. You do good at some things and do crappy at others. We can live with that, okay? So how do strategy and tolerance work together? How do they work together? Okay, over the last 80 years or so, research has piled up really high Everest levels of papers, okay, that amounted to what we would consider common sense, okay? And when that happens, excellent. It means you did good science most of the time, okay? Because science really just describes things that we can already see. It just gives us a reason why we see it that way. Tangent, okay? So we humans can only tolerate stuff so long before we lose our proverbial cool. And a lot of factors determine how long we can tolerate a frustrating stimulus aside from the amount of skill you have. Okay, so these tolerance factors will either dull a stimulus or sensitize us to it. And you can dull a stimulus on purpose as a strategy. Okay, so to recap, we learned that a purpose-filled action really just means that we have regulated our behavior around some standard. Okay, and that we have two main standards: staying alive and having a good time, and that the behavioral standards that we then regulate our behavior around encompass both of those things. That makes it a purpose-filled action. The more purposeful actions you perform or do, the more purposeful you act, the more purpose-filled your life becomes. You start living your life on purpose, and you start living your life with purpose at the same time, okay? Some behaviors adapt us to the environment, what some people would call reflexes, and some behaviors adapt to the environment to us, okay? Which some people might call conscious behavior. Most behaviors have a combination of both, okay? If something scares you, you run home. Okay, we went over purposeful action. And the main difference between people who do good at some things and suck at others, aside from what you get introduced to earlier, etc., has to do with your skill of tolerating frustration in those situations and your skill of strategizing around those frustrations so that you can conserve your frustration tolerance. You can keep your frustration skill energy high, okay? What do you find easiest to get it? What do you find easiest for you to get good at? Which also means in what areas do you find it easiest to change your behavior? And in what areas do you find it hardest to get good at stuff? Or where do you find it most difficult to change your own behavior? And then kind of contrast the differences between your ability to tolerate frustration and your ability to strategize around frustrations in those different circumstances. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for learning. Stay rational. Until next time, Dr. Kashey out.